am Tiffany Stone, 48 years old. I work in an accounting position at an air conditioning company. At home, I live with my husband Edward and my mother-in-law. We have no children. I first met Edward at a large real estate development company where I previously worked, and he had just joined as a new employee. I thought Edward was one of those modern men as I saw him being liked by female colleagues and older male employees too. However, for some reason, Edward said, other accounting staff seem a bit inapproachable. But there's something warm and nice about you, Tiffany, and he started to hand me the accounting documents exclusively. I wasn't sure whether he was a natural airhead or just slow, but there would often be errors in the documents, or they were submitted just before the deadline. Each time, he would show an apologetic attitude but kept repeating the same mistakes, resulting in me having to do a lot of overtime. Is he savvy? Or is he just cleverly maneuvering things? While maintaining a smile outwardly, I felt a bit distressed inside. However, when he saw me struggling with the company-provided stationery, he would sometimes offer me the stationery he recommended. This attention to detail didn't seem like mere flattery. I eventually fell under his spell and ended up supporting him. We grew closer when I felt ill on the train during our commute. Possibly due to consecutive overtime work during the busy season, I couldn't bear the crowd on the train and became dizzy. Somehow, I managed to reach the station I get off for work, but I was exhausted and sat on a bench on the platform, unable to move, feeling nauseous. Edward noticed me and, without caring about his suit getting dirty, carried me to the medical room under the station staff's guidance. There, I took some medicine I had with me, rested a bit, and felt better. When I contacted the workplace, my boss instructed me to go home immediately. Edward was ordered to ensure my safe return home. Despite my refusal, he ended up escorting me home. The next morning, I went to work as usual, apologized to my boss and colleagues, and explained the situation to Edward and his boss in the sales department. I'm really sorry for the inconvenience. I'd like to do something to make it up to you. Then, how about treating me to dinner on Friday? I'm a bit strapped for cash right before payday, Edward innocently requested, and I agreed with a laugh. I thought it would be a one-time dinner, but later he said I've received my salary, so let me treat you this time. As we exchanged tokens of appreciation, people around us started to see us as a couple. However, I was the only one who hurried to deny it. Edward, as always, was carefree and said, "There's no need to deny it so hastily." And before we knew it, we were treated as an official couple. 2 years later, at the age of 28, Edward proposed to me, saying, "If we get married, everyone will be at ease." So we got married. Feeling awkward about working in the same place, Edward encouraged me to quit, which was kind of unexpected. You're at the right age, and it would be better to focus on having children. Not just Edward, but also my mother-in-law strongly suggested, so I resigned. For our post-marriage living arrangements, we initially considered living in this area assuming dual income, but we were suggested to live at my father-in-law's place. My father-in-law had died 10 years ago, and after my sister-in-law, Amy, got married and moved out, Edward and my mother-in-law had been living there alone. Although I assumed we would live together eventually, starting from the beginning was unexpected. However, if Edward moved out, it would leave my mother-in-law alone, and she strongly opposed it. Convinced by the idea of saving on rent, we started living together upon getting married. Initially, there were no problems, and it was peaceful. Amy, a graduate of a prestigious university and working for a major trading company, was my mother-in-law's pride, while she showed little interest in Edward. Amy started her new life in a condo 30 minutes from downtown and often asked her mother for help around the house. "Mom, come help. I'm too busy to handle the house chores," she would plead, and my mother-in-law, pleased, would say, I have to support her, and helped with cooking, cleaning, and laundry at Amy's condo. Sometimes, when my mother-in-law couldn't manage things by herself, or when Amy took a break to enjoy afternoon tea with her, I was also asked to help. Normally, my mother-in-law didn't interfere much with Edward's and my life, making our living together more comfortable than I had expected. That's why I thought helping my sister-in-law Amy with household chores occasionally wasn't such a big deal. However, one day, Amy and my mother-in-law went on a vacation, and during that time, I was tasked with tidying up Amy's house. Amy was concerned that her husband, Nathan, would be inconvenienced when he returned home, so she asked me to take care of the house chores while she was away. After we leave, please take care of cleaning, laundry, and meal preparations, she instructed, so I began the tasks in her condo as requested. I cleaned the house, washed and ironed clothes, following the routine flow of daily chores. When it came to storing food in the refrigerator, I remembered that Amy emphasized, "Make sure to chill my husband's favorite beer," but I could not find the beer anywhere, only mineral water and health drinks were visible. Blaming myself for not checking in advance, I decided to rush out to shop. I headed to the nearby supermarket. Despite searching, I couldn't find the specific beer brand. The Belgian beer Nathan preferred was a rare item, not as readily available as typical American brands. Initially, I thought I could find it in another store, but after visiting several supermarkets and drugstores nearby, I could not find that specific brand anywhere. At that time, map apps were not yet common, and I was not very familiar with the area where Amy and her husband lived. It was challenging to know what each store carried, and as I visited numerous shops in search of the beer, I began to feel increasingly stuck. As time ticked away and my anxiety grew, I decided to catch a taxi as a last resort. I headed straight to a nearby department store and finally found the long-sought-after beer in the liquor section in the basement. I entered the apartment just a bit after 5 p.m. as the evening sky began to darken. Feeling fatigued after all the running around but not forgetting about the beer that needed to be chilled at Amy's house, I hurried over. An unexpected scene awaited me there. In the living room, I saw Nathan, who had returned home earlier than usual. "Nathan, you're back early," I exclaimed in surprise and began tidying up the apron and various food-filled bags on the messy sofa. Suddenly, Nathan asked, "What's all this about?" My wife said we hired a professional for housework, which left me slightly perplexed. According to Nathan, there had been plans to call his mother from his distant hometown to live together, supporting their busy life as a working couple. He explained, "Our family, just like my wife's, doesn't have a father anymore, and I'm an only child. My mother has no one but me to rely on, and I wanted her to live with us here in exchange for her support with the housework." However, Amy had strongly argued, "If possible, I also want to bring my mother here to live with us. But favoritism is not fair and goes against justice." This statement was laden with a deep wish for balance and fairness within the family. Eventually, a solution satisfactory to both families was found, and they decided to seek external help for the housework. The cost for this service was to be equally shared by Amy and Nathan to ensure fairness. However, the actual situation was a bit different. Secretly, my mother-in-law and I were taking on the role of household support. When Nathan discovered this fact, he acted quickly and contacted Amy. Sensing trouble, Amy and my mother-in-law rushed back from the hot springs, but a fierce argument broke out between them due to Nathan's stern inquiry. Unable to leave, I stayed there. It was then revealed that Amy had been using the money given for household support for personal beauty and relaxation, as well as to spend time with her mother. Ultimately, my mother-in-law stepped forward and offered a heartfelt apology. She promised to act more carefully in the future, managing to resolve the situation for the time being. The conflict subsided. However, not long after, it came to light that Amy had been giving gifts to a popular stylist at the beauty salon she and her mother frequented and were enjoying drinks together. Given the previous incident, Nathan, furious, refused any mediation from my mother-in-law, which eventually led to a divorce. Amy's marriage ended in less than 5 years without any disputes over asset division due to the rented condo, and the divorce was settled smoothly without claims for compensation from either side. Due to various speculations caused by them sharing the same workplace, Amy chose to resign and move to a different company, partly thanks to her getting scouted. She intended to start anew. However, due to the disappointment of not being able to achieve the career she desired, she directed her frustrations toward my mother-in-law and me. All this misfortune is your fault. If you had handled things better, none of this would have happened. You are the woman who has been an obstacle in my life. Amy vehemently blamed me. Despite the unfair accusations, they began to criticize me. At a time when I was struggling with not having children, my mother-in-law coldly said, I wanted to have a grandchild, but if the kid came from someone like you, it would have been hard to love them. Perhaps this was for the best, she remarked sarcastically. Shocked by such injustice, tears involuntarily flowed from my eyes. But what cut deeper were the words Edward uttered upon seeing me cry. It's too late to cry and regret your mistakes now. Why couldn't you have handled things better? The one who truly has a right to cry is me, he said with surprising coldness. Hearing those words, I was struck by a profound shock, realizing that Edward, despite knowing everything, was blaming me. I realized that in this house, there was no one on my side. Upon realizing that, I began to seriously consider divorce, but given my position of having resigned to focus on the home, it wasn't easy to vocalize thoughts of separation. While returning to my parents' home was a possibility, it felt awkward as my brother and his wife were already living there, especially since I was unemployed. Moreover, finding a suitable re-employment opportunity in my hometown seemed daunting. Amid these circumstances, I decided to aim for financial independence. Utilizing my network from my previous job, I discreetly found a part-time accounting position. I told my family, I feel guilty for not having children yet. I want to contribute to the household finances, and with tears in my eyes, I was able to obtain permission to work. I started work the following month, doing my utmost best, since I was fully aware of the risks of being criticized for neglecting household duties or pressured to quit my job, even on exhausting or physically challenging days. Without compromising at work and seizing every opportunity for growth, I was promoted to a full-time position 2 years after starting as a part-timer. 5 years later, upon receiving an invitation from a former boss who was starting his own business, I transitioned to the current air conditioning company, where I have been happily engaged in my work. However, on the day marking our 20 years of marriage, while washing dishes in the kitchen after dinner, Edward, who usually spent time amiably with his mother and was indifferent to my presence, came to tell me, there's something I need to discuss. Please come to the living room. Feeling this was unusual, I headed to the living room where Edward, without allowing me to sit down, announced, it's already decided, but from next month, we will begin living with my mom and sister. As I was taken aback, my mother-in-law added, Amy has said she needs some time to recover at home due to the stress of her new job affecting her health. It's best for her to relax at home during such times. Plus, having outsiders around is unsettling, right? She said. She approached me and continued with a malicious snare. Outsiders should go back to their own homes, making a dismissive gesture. At that moment, both my mother-in-law and Edward were smirking at me, as if gauging my reaction. But inside, I was secretly delighted, thinking, I can finally gain my freedom. I turned to them with a calm smile and said, I understand. I will leave tomorrow afternoon and return to my room, leaving them astonished. The next day, after seeing Edward off to work, I waited for the antique dealer I had arranged the night before to arrive. My mother-in-law looked surprised at the unfamiliar dealer, but we proceeded with the work quickly without being distracted by her reaction. In the kitchen, we checked everything from the refrigerator to the microwave oven, dishwasher, fryer, my mother-in-law's beloved soda maker, the dining table set, and even the indispensable induction cooker. In the living area, the list included the television, air conditioner, robotic vacuum cleaner, AI voice assistant, the seldom-used hot carpet, and even the sofa set. We also quickly included the washing machine, Edward's room's PC desk and bookshelf, his air conditioner, my mother-in-law's and husband's bed and dresser in the estimate. When the dealer was on the phone talking to someone, My startled mother-in-law rushed over, exclaiming, "Wait a minute, what are you doing? You can't just barge into the bedroom like that." After being sharply reprimanded by her, I replied with a smile, "After all, I'm just an outsider in this house." I wanted to clean up my belongings before leaving, and just then, the movers I had requested arrived. In no time, the household appliances and furniture listed beforehand were being carried out one after another. My mother-in-law could only walk around in a daze, unable to do anything about the swift proceedings. Eventually, even the LED lights in the room were removed, and the dealers left. What remained were only Edward's PC, some bedding, and my mother-in-law's makeup. When she confronted me again, saying, "Do you think you can get away with doing something like this?" I replied, "I've already consulted with a lawyer about the aftermath." I picked up my carry-on bag and left my in-laws' house. A week later, the lawyer I had hired informed me that Edward, my mother-in-law, and Amy had hurried to the lawyer's office on the day they were notified. When I arrived slightly later, I was greeted with, "How rude of you to be late when you made the appointment." But the lawyer calmly stated, "We did not summon you here. It's you who came and announced after being informed that we would be your point of contact from now on." Hearing this, Edward's energy deflated instantly. My mother-in-law stepped forward, saying, "Since we're all here, let's talk. I can imagine you'd return easily after leaving like that, but if you show remorse, it's a different story," asserting herself strongly while Amy and Edward nodded in agreement, assuming I would accept their proposal immediately. How overly optimistic. After exchanging a glance with the lawyer, he began, "I don't believe Tiffany intends to return to her former life. We should discuss the procedures for divorce, asset division, and compensation." Shocked by this, the three of them erupted. "Divorce is out of the question. How audacious to talk about asset division and compensation. On what right do you say such things?" The argument escalated until the lawyer intervened with a loud cough. After the room quieted down, I stated, "The divorce is already a foregone conclusion. If there's no agreement, we'll proceed with mediation or court." They tried to protest again, but a cough from the lawyer silenced them. Following a private discussion, they surprisingly quickly signed the divorce papers. However, when the topic shifted to assets and compensation, their demeanor dramatically changed. "It's outrageous to split the assets. You were just a part-time employee and essentially dependent on Edward," they began shouting. "I regret ever having you as a wife. We should be the ones demanding compensation." They criticized harshly. What I then presented was a copy of the household ledger for the past 5 years and related bank account statements. At first, they seemed unable to grasp the situation, but as the lawyer elaborated on the details, their expressions gradually changed. In fact, I had been bearing the majority of the living expenses during that period, amounting to about $3,200. "That's impossible. I was contributing $1,500 to the household every month," Edward protested. Despite Edward's objections, when compared to the $1,500 he claimed to contribute, the installment payments for Edward and my mother-in-law's credit cards were nearly the same at $1,420. Even though his salary was deposited, it merely passed through. On the other hand, the $3,200 from my salary covered everything from the mortgage for home improvements to the loans for both of their cars, daily groceries and utilities, and even loans for furniture and appliance purchases. During these 5 years, Tiffany worked as the chief accountant at her current workplace. She allocated almost the entire amount to the household expenses, totaling about $190,000. After such contributions, still being treated as a parasite is extremely unfair, don't you think? The lawyer stated, yet they read through the copies eagerly while astonished, faced with the undeniable truth. Later, perhaps understanding their disadvantageous position, my mother-in-law suddenly softened her tone. "Tiffany, we were once a family, weren't we? Let's stop the conflict and move on peacefully in our separate ways." Hearing this, I replied, "Indeed." In a fit of anger, I sold the furniture and appliances. Let's both act maturely. I then requested the lawyer to prepare a mediated divorce document. The divorce agreement stated that both parties would relinquish their claims to asset division and compensation. This marked the end of our 20-year marriage. However, the saga didn't end there. 2 months later, through the only social media I hadn't blocked, I started receiving numerous messages from my mother-in-law and Edward. Initially, I ignored them, but the relentless messages throughout the day became unbearable. I decided to face them one last time at the lawyer's office. Arriving early, I found Edward and the others already waiting, their demeanor unchanged yet visibly more haggard. Upon spotting me, Edward raised his voice. "Is it true you purchased a new apartment?" I had chosen a property unrelated to his company. But it seems like news travels fast. My mother-in-law also angrily inquired, "Where did that money come from? Isn't it shared property from our marriage?" I calmly addressed their accusations, showing them the document regarding the relinquishment of asset division we had agreed upon. Edward and my mother-in-law seemed to have forgotten this inconvenient truth, expressing shock before protesting. "That's the same as being deceived. The problem is you kept secrets." The lawyer intervened. "The funds for Tiffany's apartment came from exercising stock options at her new job, which is not subject to asset division. If you have objections, we can proceed with legal action." Edward was at a loss for words. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law declared, "Fine, then I'll take this to court." I calmly responded, "If that's the case, I'll also file for compensation." Edward's open search for a remarriage partner, even before our divorce, caused me significant emotional distress. With a smile, my statement turned my mother-in-law's face pale. Beside her, I addressed the bewildered Amy. "Of course, I will file for compensation based on the mental distress I've experienced in the past. I have preserved all evidence of the insults and harassment directed at me, and laid out recording devices, data storage, and printed messages on the table, causing Amy's expression to change. I mentioned, "Amy, do you know Megan Thompson? She is the daughter of my direct supervisor," surprising Amy even further. I had previously discussed this tumult with Executive Director Thompson, from whom I had received advice. His daughter Megan works in an important position overseeing a department at the company where I work. I've met her several times at various company events, like barbecues and year-end parties, where we had opportunities to interact. Megan is a charming individual who brightens the room, someone who can converse amicably with anyone. However, she had faced unreasonable harassment from her boss at the company she joined, impacting her mental health and leading to a leave of absence. Shockingly, the perpetrator was none other than my sister-in-law Amy. To touch a little on Megan's family background, her parents divorced when she was young, and she grew up in a father-daughter household with her father. As such, she largely grew up without the warm support of an older female figure. When she reached out to me wanting emotional support, I readily accepted her request. We talked over tea at a cafe, discussing everything from daily trivialities to her workplace woes. In the course of our conversations, Amy's name came up. I was surprised. It later emerged that Amy wasn't on leave due to illness, but had been ordered to stay at home because her inappropriate actions towards Megan had become an issue. I felt a strong sense of urgency and got the final push to proceed with the divorce due to a clear reason. I anticipated that if my sister-in-law Amy lost her job, she would almost certainly move into our house. Such a scenario would put me under further financial and emotional strain. While pondering how to proceed with the divorce advantageously, I was unexpectedly kicked out by Edward and my mother-in-law, which serendipitously turned the situation in my favor. To capitalize on this opportunity, I exaggerated selling off furniture and appliances. This act was a tactic to feign mutual loss to avoid property division and compensation claims, motivated by wanting to keep the movement of funds from exercising my hidden stock options. Due to Edward and my mother-in-law's wasteful nature, our savings were meager, and a strict division of assets would have left me at a loss. Thus, I cleverly strategized to protect my position while favorably navigating the divorce. I understood that claiming compensation from a party without the means to pay would be futile, even if I won. Hence, I emphasized my contributions to living expenses, creating a semblance of indebtedness to influence them to accept the waiver of property division. Edward, my mother-in-law, and Amy eventually grasped the situation. They felt relieved, thinking that expelling me from the family would restore their peaceful life. But their assumption was naive. The decline in their living standards after my departure was stark, especially my mother-in-law, who, as I had pointed out earlier, continued to proclaim loudly to friends, relatives, and even distant acquaintances that she was planning to sever ties with a daughter-in-law who could only manage part-time work and wouldn't even give her a grandchild. Moreover, she was actively seeking matchmaking opportunities for Edward, saying, "If you know any suitable young ladies, please introduce them to my son." The list of ideal daughter-in-law criteria she proposed was unrealistic and laden with unfairness. These demands were not only anachronistic but also crossed ethical boundaries, reflecting her detached personal desires. She was overly fixated on youth as a factor in a prospective wife and generally dismissed the idea of having extensive social experience. She also expected the daughter-in-law to sever ties with her family and to receive a certain amount of assets upfront from them, an exceedingly unfair demand. Additionally, she required medical proof of the woman's fertility before marriage, an extreme request that disregarded human rights. These conditions shocked everyone with their excessiveness and irrationality, subjecting my mother-in-law to widespread criticism. Every one of her utterances emanated from a deeply egocentric view, finding no sympathy from listeners. Under these circumstances, there was no room for serious consideration of her proposals, further highlighting her unrealistic demands. The outlandishness of her conditions alienated and disappointed all who heard them. Despite her attempts to impose her unrealistic expectations, the response from those around her was distinctly cold and dismissive. Even with additional criteria like beautiful, stylish, and tall, everyone sensed the emptiness of those demands, and no marriage proposals were forthcoming for Edward. Subsequently, as my mother-in-law hastened the search for marriage prospects, she faced increasing rejection and was ignored by those around her. As news of our divorce spread, they became the subject of local gossip, known as the embarrassing mother and child. Previously arrogant, my mother-in-law could no longer withstand the harsh judgment of society and began to seclude herself at home. Occasionally, cries and the sound of breaking dishes emanated from their house, becoming a whispered topic among neighbors. It seems my mother-in-law has been unable to control her emotions since I left the house. Once using me as an outlet for her stress and finding solace in shopping and trips, she may now be unleashing her frustration within the confines of her home. As for Edward, since he had left all financial management to me, he was clueless about handling money. Even after the lawyer explained the situation, he still overestimated his abilities. However, the mother and daughter duo, supposed to take over house chores, found them too bothersome and neglected their responsibilities. Their meals resorted to takeout or department store food, relying on cleaning and laundry services, leaving other minor administrative tasks unattended. Consequently, their finances collapsed within just 2 months. Edward had to retrieve his credit card from his mother, and his diet became simple and unbalanced. I heard that his meals now consisted of toast and coffee for breakfast, cup noodles for lunch, and discounted food for dinner. Laundry was done in bulk when clothes ran out, and cleaning was focused only on visible areas, leading to a decline in Edward's health due to poor nutrition and hygiene. Once youthful-looking, he gained weight, his skin worsened, and his hair became greasy, diminishing his former charm. Clients complained more and more, especially since appearance is important in sales, resulting in his reassignment to a back-office role and a salary reduction. Acknowledging this wake-up call, Edward reached out through the lawyer, expressing a desire to sever ties with his mother and sister and start anew with me. However, since I had instructed the lawyer to prevent any contact with me under any circumstances, The lawyer firmly rejected Edward's wishes. He was warned that if he tried to force his way into my workplace or new home, the police would be notified, preventing further contact. Amy, another key figure in this saga, faced stern criticism from Megan, who I had informed about the situation. Megan exclaimed, "What's wrong with you? And here I thought you might have changed at least a little bit after what had happened between us. Blaming Tiffany for your divorce and continuing such harassment. How spiteful can you be?" When Megan contacted her employer to resign, she was asked about her reasons. She explained, "It's a personal matter not directly related to my work," but then detailed the issues to HR and administration. After seeing everyone's shock, she said, "I acknowledge there were imperfections on my part too. I believed we could compromise and cooperate for the company's benefit if there was genuine remorse. However, I assert that this is not feasible." Submitting her resignation, she added, "Working under her guidance again would be mentally impossible." Megan smoothly completed her resignation process and transferred to another company in the same industry, which allowed her to work from home until her health fully recovered. At her previous company, her sudden resignation, despite being on leave, shocked her colleagues and superiors. The news that her departure was due to relentless harassment from Amy spread internally and externally, exacerbating the situation. This rumor quickly disseminated, significantly affecting the company's atmosphere. Colleagues and juniors who respected Megan began to seriously reconsider their career paths, leading to a wave of transfers and resignations. Megan's decisions had a profound impact on many lives. The company's management recognized the severity of the situation and convened an emergency meeting. They decided to swiftly transfer Amy to a related company in another region as an immediate solution. Although this decision was hard for Amy to accept, it was communicated with a firm stance of no other options. Initially resistant, Amy had to begrudgingly accept the transfer when faced with the threat of a possible layoff. Even in her new environment, her past actions preceded her, leading to inevitable isolation within the new office. Surrounded by colleagues who avoid her except for necessary work-related conversations, Amy spends her days in solitude. Considering resignation and yearning to return to her hometown, Amy faced relentless criticism from Edward and her mother. "You'll just be a burden if you come back unemployed. Who do you think caused all this misfortune?" They rebuked her, completely rejecting her by saying, "You're the calamity itself that brought disaster to this house." These events starkly illustrate the tragic circumstances Amy was facing. I heard she is now working in a quiet, out-of-the-way department of a subsidiary, a far cry from her former self, becoming a humble and unnoticed presence, diligently focusing on her tasks. She has transformed into a shadow of her former vibrant self, attracting no attention and blending into the background. My own life has also reached a significant turning point. After settling the tumultuous events, including officially ending my marriage with Edward, I embarked on a new chapter with Executive Director Thompson, encouraged by the warm recommendation of his daughter, Megan. Reflecting on the 20 years with Edward, I initially had little interest in remarrying. However, Megan encouraged me, saying, "Marriage can change significantly depending on the partner you choose." My father may be older, but he is truly a rare gem. Indeed, in less than a year with Executive Director Thompson and Megan, I've experienced more smiles and happiness than in the 20 years with Edward. Having a partner to share the joy of expressing oneself and living freely brings an immeasurable sense of happiness. While I sometimes regret not making this decision sooner, dwelling on past regrets is a waste of the present, which is invaluable. Moving forward, I am determined to cherish the new family life with Megan and Executive Director Thompson, building a richer and more peaceful future together.